I mean, think about how many Taylor Swifts probably never become Taylor Swift because they grow up in a low income community. There isn't a strong music program at their school, so there's never exposed. And unfortunately, that idea ends up dying and that passion ends up turning into nothing.
Say you were in Venezuela and you were a very wealthy family and you had generational wealth. You saw that wiped out in a matter of months. Everything that your father's father, your father, and your entire family has worked for, gone like that. Today, we have a very special guest, my friend Kyle Herron, who is the co-founder of Frontier Mining, which is a leading cryptocurrency mining and hosting company. In this episode, we'll be discussing Kyle's journey as an entrepreneur, as well as his predictions for the future of Bitcoin mining, Bitcoin's price, and artificial intelligence. During this podcast, you'll hear some of the inside secrets of the entertainment and events industry, including how negotiations for artists and events actually operate. As someone with a wealth of knowledge about Bitcoin mining, Kyle addresses some of the most common misconceptions about our industry and gives you his bold predictions for its future. Finally, we discuss the importance of understanding how Bitcoin will affect everyone's lives, whether you fully understand it or not. Overall, Kyle is an incredibly interesting, knowledgeable, and passionate human being, and I'm grateful to share this entertaining, thought-provoking, and informative conversation with you. So sit back, relax, and enjoy. It's one that you'll want to watch till the end. All right, so I have some fun questions to start off here with. So they're kind of like rapid-fire questions that are not crypto-related or completely like mining related. So the first one is if you had to add one feature to the iPhone, what would it be?
That's awesome. I'll first off start off by saying, Will, that I really appreciate you making this happen, man. It's great to see you again. Great to be connected again. And obviously, it's been a pleasure to watch Saz Mining grow its footprint in the industry. So really excited about everything that you guys are doing over there. Back to the rapid fire question, though, the more important thing, the one feature I'd add to the iPhone. The first one that comes to mind, honestly, is I really want to send later function on iMessage. This is not the most innovative thing in the world, but every other app that I use has it. Like my email has it, Telegram has it, Microsoft Teams has it, and so forth. And with iMessage, I mean, with the crypto industry, we're working till 2, 3 a.m. at night, right? But I don't necessarily want to reach out to my client at 2 or 3 a.m. in the morning. So I'd much prefer a send later function on iMessage. There's probably a lot more interesting ones that we could dig into over the course of this conversation, but that would actually make a difference in my life right now.
Yeah, that's a good answer. The last person I spoke to, they came up with a feature that would almost be like a discipline, like screen restriction type of application. So just, if you're using social media or something, you can toss it on and then not.
Well, I've seen
a lot of wasted hours.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Well, I've seen some really clever ideas online. Like people have put, for example, it's like the screen time function that's currently in the iPhone where you can block certain apps at certain times of the day. But if you try to break through the screen time function, which you can do just by tapping a button on your phone, it charges your debit card automatically.
Oh, that's fascinating. Okay.
Yeah, and then you start getting charged for every maybe 15-minute increment that you're on Instagram, you get charged like $5, right? And I don't know exactly where the funds go. Maybe the owner of the screen time app just becomes rich because people can't stay away from the apps that typically distract them. But I mean, my phone is honestly locked down most of the time. I have all those tools on, but I can see for the average user that it probably wouldn't be a bad idea.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. I really want to hear about your entrepreneurial journey, because you haven't always been in, the crypto industry working with mining. You've been an entrepreneur and done other things before that. And one of the things that seems like a very interesting topic that I've actually never really dove in depth in is the entertainment industry. And that's one part of the conversation that I want to dive into initially. So maybe let's start by having you talk about the earlier stages of your entrepreneurial journey. And then whenever it gets into that, promotion aspect, we can start diving into some of the details. I'm personally just very, very curious how that world works, because I see it from the outside. It seems very opaque. And I feel like now I get to talk with someone who was on the inside and get the inside scoop here.
How did I land in that industry? It was a lot of, it was ultimately going back to the question that I had mentioned that I typically share with others when it comes to risk in life and the evaluation of risk, which is just asking what your why is. Like, what's your motivator in life, right? So I took a couple different things that led me in the music industry. I took what my why was, which I'll share in a moment. And then number two, I took that general life philosophy as I'm here for a reason. And my first step in this journey is discovering what that reason is, right? And I knew at a young age that what I really, really enjoyed doing was not necessarily being the person who had the great idea. And that was such a humbling experience to realize that I may not be that person. That may not be my gift. Being the innovator and the ideator may not be necessarily where my skill sets lie. A lot more I've discovered over time that a lot more of what I've been gifted with is the ability to integrate with others who have great ideas and are great thinkers, right? And so when it came to the music industry, that just felt like a really natural fit because you have such an abundance of creators, but you don't have necessarily an abundance of facilitators, right? With every great creator, you need to take their canvas that may be the size of a building and bring it all the way down to an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper and say, no, I want you to fit all of your ideas onto this versus just let them run for infinity. And so that's what kind of initially drew me towards the industry was I saw an opportunity, number one, to work towards my reason, and number two, to really start to sort of nurture this skill that I was interested in, which was becoming a facilitator of great creatives. And thanks to the internet, we can have, for example, for Will to start a podcast, he doesn't need Joe Rogan to say, hey, Will can start a podcast. Will can just start the podcast. So for me, I said, I'm just going to go try a blog out. And I launched this kind of blog, right? And I initially started just by kind of pouring out some of my thoughts, opinions on new artists, the industry as a whole. I was really plugged into the electronic dance community at the time. So I kind of had a sense of what was happening in the space. And I took a totally different perspective in that industry versus being, the guy that would go to shows and take all of these wild substances. I was really studying the business behind these concerts and these experiences and who was forming them. So I started to write on those. And then ultimately that led me to partnering up with a group that was actually putting on those concerts. I met the CEO. I started to talk with him at a couple of the shows I was at. And I was really captivated by what he was doing. We ended up forming a relationship. And through that process, one of my closest friends growing up he and I said, hey, Kyle, what if we just went and tried this on our own? We saw that this guy, Brandon, can do it with his company. What if we just attempted to do the same thing? It doesn't seem overly complex, the concept of putting on a concert. And so that led to the formation of one of my first formal companies, which is a company called Beats for Better that I founded years ago. And the concept behind Beats for Better was twofold. So number one, we wanted to put on concerts. We thought the idea was really cool. I was already a little bit plugged into the space at the time. We knew a lot of artists. We'd been around the community for a while. And we just wanted to give the opportunity really for young talent to have a platform that they could show themselves off on. Because again, the hardest things for creatives is to facilitate their creativity into a business. So I was really, really drawn by that. And then, the second piece of it too is we had a philanthropic component that we really believed in. We believed that artists were missing a couple of different things, and one of the big things that we felt like artists were missing is that there's a lot of talent within the U.S. and abroad that just isn't ever tapped into because the opportunity is not provided. I mean, think about how many Taylor Swifts probably never become Taylor Swift because they grow up in a low-income community. There isn't a strong music program at their school, so there's never exposed. And unfortunately, that idea ends up dying and that passion ends up turning into nothing.
I'm very curious as to how the structuring and negotiations between the creatives and the actual companies operates, because you always hear about these companies and these creatives, and you hear about these stories where things don't go really well, right? And I think it goes back to what you mentioned, where you can be a young, very talented singer or DJ, whatever you may be, and you'll just run into a very savvy businessman or a very savvy company that understands the ins and outs and have negotiated hundreds of contracts, and you're out there, it's your first time, you're good, but you have no idea what's going on. You're most likely struggling financially, and you are almost reliant on one of these companies.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, I think a lot of it will feel very similar to the startup tech space, right? Because ultimately that's what these two industries are. They're two industries that both technology and entertainment have been around for a really, really long time, but there's constantly new people that are trying to enter into the space, right? So unlike consumer goods, unlike Kleenex, for example, which is, or Clorox, these businesses that have been around for hundreds of years, very little innovation in the space. Tech and entertainment are constantly changing, right? And so because of that, you constantly get new participants, and new participants always means more industry vulnerability, right? Because it means someone's probably going to get hurt because someone who's been around is going to try to take advantage of them. It's unfortunately the nature of a capitalistic society, and it's also unfortunately the nature of a creative, because creatives typically want one thing: push their message out to the world as much and as far as they can. Getting back to your question, though, about where I've seen this actually play out in the course of my life. I mean, a classic example was actually my college roommate. So he was a really talented musician in high school. had this band that he had formed, and they were to the point where they were getting national notoriety. And this is, by the way, pre SoundCloud, pre TikTok, pre all that. I mean, those platforms were really, really early stage at the time, because this was several years ago. So he starts his band in high school, doing really well. One of the major labels, I think it was Republic, I can't remember who it was, came to him and said, hey, we really like what you're doing. We want to give you a 3-album deal. But here's the problem. And again, this is the challenge with these young entrepreneurs. I put it in quotes because they're artists, but they really are entrepreneurs because they're responsible for protecting their businesses. So this major label comes to them and says, hey, we really like what you did. We want to give you a 3-album deal, but here are the terms of the deal. And this is something in the industry known as a 360 contract. They're very, very common in the music industry. They're also very common in other entertainment, other sectors of the entertainment industry. But a 360 deal is basically exactly what it sounds like. In this case, the record label comes in and they say, we're going to take all creative rights from your work for these 3 albums. So you're basically going to commit to us 3 albums. We own your name, your likeness, your brand, everything for these 3 albums. Once the 3 albums are produced, we let you off the hook. You can have all of your creative freedom back, right? Now, here's where these artists get in trouble. So they sign into a deal like that. And this is exactly what happened to my friend Steven. They signed to a deal like that. And the record label says, awesome, we think you're doing great. Here's a budget for your first album. Go shoot a couple music videos. Have a lot of fun with it, right? And then they come back and they say, okay, great, album's done. Music videos are done. Let's go put this out in the world. And they put it out in the world and it doesn't do very well, right? And the audience doesn't receive it very well. They go back to the record label, and in a traditional startup world, that's called product testing. So we put our product out in the world. The world says, we don't love it. Great, bring the product back. Let's refine it, clean it up, and kick it out again. It doesn't work like that in the music industry. Product goes out, doesn't work, comes back to the record label. Hey, record label, we need another $400,000 to produce another album, more music videos, et cetera, to go test the audience again. The record label says, we didn't really like our return on invested capital for that first album. So we're going to wait for a little bit. And in the world of a 360 contract, waiting can be years, right? So an artist can say, I'm ready for the second album. And the record label can say, we're just going to wait on it for a couple of years. Well, what happens to a lot of artists happened to my friend Steven, where they shelf you, right? And they say, we'll get back to you when we're ready. And what ends up happening is they never get back to you.
So one final question on this, and then we can start moving into the more crypto, Bitcoin focused conversation.
I enjoy this.
This is like
we talk about mining
very
enough,
selfish
right?
on. Like I just have been so curious about this. And after seeing that was your background, it's like I have to dive into this with you. What is one thing that you can leave me and the rest of the listeners with before we put this topic to bed?
In regards to the music industry?
In regards to the music industry, yeah. And one final piece that might be interesting as well is if you have any predictions for the future, just because I know that it's evolved so much over, like you mentioned, it's like the tech industry. There's just so many new technologies. People are leveraging them in different ways. You have a different market dynamic once these new technologies come in. So from your point of view and your background, I'm curious if there's anything that you can share there.
It's an awesome question, Will. It really is an awesome question, because as you can probably tell from the earlier phase of this conversation, a lot of the ways that I approach life is philosophical and then philanthropic, right? So I look at it from both perspectives. And, when it comes to the music industry, I really, really strongly believe that what will ultimately carry the torch of the light of humanity will be creatives, because a lot of the non-creative components of humans will end up in the hands of AI. Right. So no longer is the ability to write a fast email or negotiate well in a sales call really be that valuable to us in 50, 60, 70 years, because a lot of that stuff's going to be taken over. I mean, I went to ChatGPT the other day and said, hey, write me a pitch email. And it was pretty good. It was pretty good.
It was crazy.
So it just goes to show that the ones that will carry the torch of the light of humanity are going to be creatives. And so that's why I always encourage people to tap in their creative brains. But the second piece is, you have to be really focused, if you want humanity's light to be carried, on supporting creatives, and particularly independent creatives. So what I would leave your listeners with is, if you have the opportunity to support an independent creator, remember that you're not just doing it to launch their career, you're actually doing it to carry, again, the light of humanity forward. Creatives don't very rarely receive words of affirmation. They very rarely receive monetary donations as well. But if you get the opportunity to impact a creator's life, I always highly recommend it, because it's such a critical component of our future. And then the second thing, of course, too, is just tap into your own creativity as well. There's so many people that have said to me before, and this is an adage that unfortunately gets repeated throughout our society, which is that I'm not creative. Well, everyone's creative in some way. And you may not realize it, but creativity can appear in a lot of different forms of your life. It can appear in the way that you write, the way you speak, the way that you cook, the way that you eat, the types of relationships you build. I mean, creativity is not just necessarily consolidated all the way back to just painting and drawing and playing music and et cetera. So tap into your own creativity and support the creativity of others, because it's so incredibly important in carrying, again, forward the torch that is the light of humanity. So that's just so incredibly important to me to share. Now, secondarily, that kind of leans into what does the future of this world look like, right? And I think the reality is that the entertainment industry as a whole is going to follow the same trends that we're seeing in other industries. They're just going to leverage the technologies that are appearing and being developed in other places. So when you think about things like artificial intelligence, virtual reality, when you think about really more all of that combined together, you see it as immersive experiences. And I feel like that's the future of entertainment in a lot of ways, is how much more immersive can we get? We're already at a stage where we have things like limited forms of virtual reality. We have really immersive movie experiences, with IMAX, for example. Now you go to certain theme parks and they have both those components integrated into them. So I think it's just going to become more and more immersive. And then as it becomes more immersive, it's going to, of course, become more custom and tailored specific to the individual. So now when you go to a theme park of the future, it's going to be, I'm going to put on my VR mask and everything around me is going to be tailored to my likes and desires.
Okay, so we could just dive into the Bitcoin side now.
Oh boy. Okay.
And so maybe the best place to start is, why do you think Bitcoin is important to the people who might not be in Bitcoin yet, or might not know much about it yet? If you were to talk with one of them and try and say, hey, look, I know that this might not be your cup of tea. You might not be super
right.
involved in it, but why? But this is why you might want to pay attention, or this is what you might want to think about when you hear Bitcoin.
Yeah. And I'll use this as an opportunity to transition from what we were previously speaking about, because I am a non-technical founder in the Bitcoin space, right? And so I have a different perspective on why I entered in this space. And I definitely did not enter in because I was excited to read about the Bitcoin white paper and all of the various lines of code that have contributed to this project. That wasn't my initial draw. I've become more interested in that as I've gotten in the industry, but came here for a totally different reason. And initially I came here, kind of dating back to the journey into Frontier. Initially I came here because I just have a strong passion for helping build platforms to help other people launch off of, right? So my journey with Beats for Better that I was sharing earlier was ultimately to build a platform for young artists, creatives, et cetera, to be able to facilitate their creativeness and launch real businesses. And it was all about platform development for them. And what I think the most important thing when it comes to something like Bitcoin that's so beyond the tactical components of how Bitcoin is introduced is that we live in a world where not everyone has access to this great financial ecosystem that the U.S. and its residents get to participate in. Even though our system is broken, we have a place that for the most part we can feel comfortable storing our funds. And even though money is not everything, money at the end of the day is ultimately what society has created as its key, really, for achieving your dreams. It's very, very difficult to achieve everything you want in this life without having some sort of financial stability, and in many cases, some form of financial success. And so for the dreamers out there who are like, I want to do it not because of the money, I want to do it just because I love the thing that I'm doing and I'm really passionate about this North Star, remember that that although money is not everything, it's certainly something. And as my grandmother's always said, money's not everything, but it's certainly nice to have, right? And so because of that, we have to look at money a little bit more strategically as dreamers that are maybe listening to this podcast today, as looking at it as a really important key to our future. And so again, that gets back to how do we, if we know that money is an important part, it's not everything, but it's part of what we're trying to do, then we have to look at who is the stewards of our capital. Right. And that gets back to the dangers of the centralized system that we operate in, where we've seen that the stewards of our capital, the people that are holding our money, whether it be investors, banks, et cetera, maybe can't always be trusted. Right. Or maybe it's just the government that can't be trusted. And so if it's our money, but we're putting it in the hands of other people, and those other people we're not 100% confident in, then we need to recontrol our funds. And so now the question you ask yourself, and the question that Satoshi asked himself over a decade ago, is how do we solve that problem? Right? We know that finances are the means to our dreams. We know that they're in the hands of people that we don't necessarily trust. We might trust them. Some of us fully trust them, but I know a lot of people don't, right? Particularly young people that are rising in our world and seeing some of the economic challenges we're facing. And the best answer that we've seen to that question so far is Bitcoin, right? we've tried to solve this problem before, but ultimately Bitcoin seems to be the best answer that we have so far. And so when I think about why Bitcoin matters, it matters for a lot of reasons. It matters for the reasons I just described, that we want to take control, again, of our life. And to take control of our life, we have to take control of the means to our dreams. In this case, finances are a part of that. So by controlling our finances, we control more of our life, and therefore can get closer to achieving our dreams. You can see how Bitcoin naturally fits into our day-to-day and why it's important. The second thing is that this goes back to something we shared earlier in the podcast that I was mentioning, which is everyone else's dreams, right? So we have our own dreams that we want to achieve through all the methodologies we've spoken about in this call, the power of entrepreneurship, being able to have security and confidence in how we control our finances. But the second question is, how do we achieve everyone else's dreams, and why are those important, right? And everyone else's dreams, unfortunately, are not all afforded with the same level of opportunity and support that you and I see, Will, right? There's people, again, in places all around the world who don't even have the ability to even consider their dreams because they're so focused on just making sure the food's on the table, right? And a big problem with a lot of those people, and the reason that they're not able to achieve the success that we're able to, is because they're not able to tap into any financial systems that exist, right? A lot of success is built in the world, not just by making money, but by multiplying money. But if you don't even have the ability to access a bank account, how will you ever multiply your money?
Well said. Yeah, Bitcoin, it's pretty incredible when you look at it from not just like the Western point of view, which, I mean, you mentioned this. It's crazy that there are so many places around the world where people just don't even have access to the basic financial systems that you and I or any of the listeners on this podcast have. I mean, we take banks for granted a lot of the times, because if you look at, let's say that you're living in, let's say that you were living in Ukraine, for example, when you were trying to leave the country, Bitcoin was saving lives there. Let's say that you're crossing over a border, you don't have documentation, you're not going to be able to open a bank account. You're not going to be able to take out a loan or do any of these things that allow us to go and actually build a company and go and interact with the world in a more efficient way. And at the end of the day, money is a game of trust, right? If you believe in the currency, that's what gives it value. When you see these countries going through hyperinflation, say you were in Venezuela and you were a very wealthy family and you had generational wealth, you saw that wiped out in a matter of months. Everything that your father's father, your father, and your entire family has worked for, gone like that. And there was nothing that you could really do. There were people that went and protected themselves in Bitcoin, because for the first time ever, we've created a form of money that is not controlled by a single government, organization, person. And that's pretty revolutionary. It's the first time that you have money that's backed by real world energy. It's wild to see how many people over the past few years have suddenly realized what they thought that they owned, what you thought that you had complete control over, might not necessarily be yours. And it didn't matter if you were, someone who didn't have a dollar to your name versus a Russian oligarch. Anyone can seize your assets. And we've even seen it with countries. Like we've seen us taking away money from like countries that thought that they had foreign reserves in dollars with the US, just having that wiped away. And so I think that at the end of the day, what the message I'll leave people with on the Bitcoin side, if they haven't really looked into it that much, is Bitcoin is the only true asset that you can 100% own, where you don't need to rely on a separate counterparty or third party. No bank can take away your Bitcoin. No government, no whoever. If you have the private key to your Bitcoin wallet, that is your Bitcoin, and you can access it from everywhere. And so maybe I should have made that a little bit more clear earlier when we were talking about the people in Ukraine. If you were living in Ukraine and you were trying to go to the bank and you were trying to take out your money, it's like you see that you have $100,000 in your bank, you're trying to withdraw it. Well, it's very, very upsetting to realize that that is not your money, and you might not be able to get out of the country. You might not have access to any capital, and that can mean, the difference between being able to buy food, being able to buy shelter, being able to buy your way out of a country that is in the middle of a war. And so,
it's the difference between life and death ultimately, right?
Yeah, exactly. And the thing is it's never a problem until it is, And so
exactly
with Bitcoin, it's always nice to be able to say, look, you can protect generational wealth much more easily. And it sounds crazy to talk about this stuff right now because this is just so detached from all of our everyday lives. But at the end of the day, at least just understanding that there are some of these dynamics at play it might make
Yeah,
sense to have a little bit of Bitcoin in a Bitcoin wallet that you control, just as a safety precaution.
I totally agree with you. And you use the example of Ukraine, which I'm sure many listeners can say, well, Will, that's an extreme example of a country that's in a war-torn scenario. But let's use an example of that looks totally different than that. Like you take Canada, which is generally a peaceful country, generally a happy country. They had riots a couple of years ago where truckers were going on strike because they felt like they were underpaid. And the government said, we're going to disable your access to your personal funds if you continue on this strike. And they did. And there were truckers that went to their bank account and they tried to withdraw funds from their ATM, and the government said, no, you can't touch it. So nothing is in your control when it's not in your pocket.
100%. Well said. I'm really glad you brought up the trucker situation in Canada, because 100%, it's one of those things that it's always, someone else until it is you. So last question that I wanted to ask you on Bitcoin, and this one, it's a price action question, but you don't have to answer it in a price action way. So the question is,
okay.
The question is your price prediction for Bitcoin, or if you don't want to give a price prediction for Bitcoin, you could give a really long-term price prediction. Just give it whatever time period you want. I'm someone where I believe it's very difficult to make a short-term prediction, but I can make longer-term predictions just seeing, okay, this is where the puck's going. The one other piece as well that I wanted to, before you answer that, is to ask you, for everyone listening, if they want to follow what you're doing, support what it is that you're working on with Frontier, or anything else that you just want to share at this point in time, where can they stay connected with you?
Yeah, absolutely. They're two great questions. Well, I mean, I think we really hit the point home in the importance of becoming decentralized from centralized institutions and the power in Bitcoin doing that. And ultimately, in the case of Bitcoin, you can tie a quantitative value to the amount of decentralized activity that's occurring, because typically the higher the price of Bitcoin, the more people that are participating in the network, the more people participating in the network, the more people getting into a decentralized space, and the safer that our world ultimately becomes. The sky is the limit for Bitcoin ultimately. One of the most unique aspects of Bitcoin, and is ultimately the driver behind price, unlike many assets like the US dollar, the more people that participate in the US dollar, it doesn't necessarily mean the dollar's value is going to increase, because there's not a limited number of supply of dollars that are out there. Whereas on the other hand, Bitcoin is sort of interesting. The reason we see a direct uptick in the price of Bitcoin when more people participate in the network is because there's only a limited amount of Bitcoin that will ever exist, 21 million to be exact. In 2140, the last Bitcoin will ever be mined, meaning that we'll have a legitimate, fully capped currency at that point. But even within the next 12 months or 13 months from now, we'll be entering into the halving, and the number of Bitcoin that will be released into circulation every day will be cut into half. So when I think about where Bitcoin goes, anything that is supply capped is theoretically going to have no ceiling to what its price value could become, right? A price value of Bitcoin is going to be dependent upon, of course, number of people that participate in it, amount of Bitcoin that can be, the how we value Bitcoin in terms of its value against a currency, and if currencies. The one problem with valuing Bitcoin against in comparison to a fiat currency is that fiat currencies don't have really any true value to them. So it's difficult to price Bitcoin in terms of dollars, especially, again, when we look at dollars specifically being a currency that's just continuing to become devalued over time. So I always have a hard time pricing it in terms of dollars. But in terms of what the value of Bitcoin will be in dollars at least for the short term, because again, I have a hard time with long-term price predictions because of the devaluing of the US dollar. To give a shorter term prediction of what I think that will mean, I don't necessarily think that Bitcoin in 2023 is going to be a $60,000 asset again. I think the primary reason why is that there's just greater macro uncertainty, and Bitcoin is still not a complete inflation hedge. Bitcoin does still trade like a risk asset, typically trades with stocks like what you're going to see in technology. And during uncertain financial times, people are not typically going for high risk asset. And so I think we have short-term volatility, no question, because of macro market conditions, because of the large amounts of institutional capital that's in the Bitcoin space. Long-term value, I think, is going to be more closely correlated with, again, the supply cap of Bitcoin, the long-term value of being a decentralized currency. And my last note is where we go with price. Yeah, I mean, the only data point that I'd tack onto price right now is that we know that Bitcoin traditionally has a 6 to 7x increase post halvings, right? We have a halving that was in 2020 that led to the $60,000 price point for Bitcoin in 2021. We'll probably see something similar 2024 to 2025, I would suspect, with an April 2024 halving. So What does that mean? Again, I'm not good at price predictions, but if I was to guess, I would say Bitcoin probably hovers between 20 to 40K leading up into the halving. Bitcoin post-halving, I think it could be a six-figure asset post-halving, but that's about as specific as I'll get.
That's a really good framework, I think, to think through things. And also for everyone listening who doesn't know how the mining cycle works, when he's talking about halving, that's dealing with the distribution of Bitcoin to the Bitcoin miners. And that the reason why that matters is because that's affecting the supply side of Bitcoin. The last topic that I want to touch on in this episode with you, Kyle, is artificial intelligence. I've been secretly just waiting for this part the entire episode. I guess the easiest question that we could probably start with is almost leave you an open floor and just stream of consciousness. What are your thoughts on all these advancements happening in artificial intelligence right now? Because it's really been an absolute whirlwind, I would say, for the past 3 months. And I know that you have been, as well as myself, have been following artificial intelligence and been thinking about it, talking about it for, at least, when was our last podcast? Like a couple of
years ago.
Yeah, at least a couple of years we've been thinking about these topics, whereas the general public is now, I would say, starting to hear more about it and get dialed in. So just your general thoughts to start.
Yeah, general thoughts are very, very, very general, because I think that we're starting to see a lot more tactical applications of artificial intelligence. And so when you think about the bigger, greater picture here, it's a wide angle that I look at it from, in terms of what does this actually mean for humanity over the next several centuries. We oftentimes feel like things like AI and automation are not already, that are not here yet. We talk about them as if they're a future concept. Well, what about when artificial intelligence is, delivering me the weather every day? Or what about when I go to a McDonald's or go to a grocery store and there's no cashiers anymore? And the reality is that all of that already exists right now. It exists in forms that we take in many ways as just being a part of our day to day. This very computer that we're on right now having this podcast, Will, is already a massive step towards us leaning more heavily on technology as our crutch. A phone, an iPad, an Apple Watch, an Oura Ring. All of these different tools are all of a sudden starting to integrate us more with technology to the point where we're starting to sort of feel like a cyborg. I mean, how much less of a full human do you feel when you leave your phone inside and you go out for a walk? All of a sudden, you start to feel a little bit detached from yourself. I mean, I know for me, for example, I pour a lot of my mind into the notepad on my phone because my mind, I realize, is really insignificant and weak, and it needs an extra set of hands, essentially, to help to keep it operating at its highest rate of speed. Right? I mean, we're far more efficient as humans than we were 100 years ago, but a lot of it is just because technology's already been introduced into our life. So when you talk about my general thoughts on AI, I say, well, we're already far down that path. We're already deeply intertwined with technology. We already are part cyborg. Now, we might feel like we're not because I can remove this ring, I can throw my phone in the trash, et cetera, but it's just a slow process of the innovation diffusing where it's more directly integrated with our bodies. And we're not far away from starting to see an Apple Watch become a chip or an Oura Ring become a pill. These types of things are well within our grasp. And if anything, what the greater, bigger, more powerful minds of the world are doing is they're just warming us up to what that integration of human and technology might end up looking like.
Yeah. If you take a step back and look at how good this technology has gotten. I'm not sure how many of the listeners have played around with tools like ChatGPT, and the newest version 4.0 just came out for the premium subscribers there. But it is just mind blowing how good these tools are. I mean, when you just think about Google in and of itself in the early days, and even before any of this technology, it's pretty revolutionary, disruptive to the way the education system works, right? Yep. It's kind of silly that when you're in school, you're not allowed to use this tool that you're going to be using all the time when you graduate. And when you take a step back and look at how quickly this tool is improving, and understanding just when you're building these models, one of the big limitations right now is really just data center infrastructure and the compute potential for running this type of a model. The people who get good with AI and are able to interact with the tool quickly are going to be able to be so much more productive than everyone else that doesn't get to use that tool. Imagine trying to compete in the world today without understanding the internet, right? If you're not allowed to have a website, not allowed to leverage any digital infrastructure, you're going to get absolutely smashed. And right now we're in a weird place where it's almost like that type of a step change, except we're not in a world where all the companies are leveraging the AI tools in a very efficient way. I took like a week and a half off of just pure deep work studying, trying to figure out how to interact with these tools, how to leverage it. Like one of the cool tips that if you're listening, and I recommend you try this, you might have already tried it at some point, Kyle, but you can almost turn the AI into any expert in the entire world. Like let's say that you are trying to build a nutrition plan, for example. Say, pretend that you're a professional bodybuilding coach who specializes in men's physique, and just like now it's like that person that can give you advice and say, create me a diet plan or create a workout plan for a man that has been lifting for 5 years, or just literally put yourself and you can consult with this AI as if it's the world expert. Pretend that you're world class. Pretend you're the best, world class CEO, entrepreneur in the world, and then work back and forth with it, communicate like it's a mentor. It all kind of comes back to what you had actually mentioned earlier in the conversation when we were talking about the entertainment side, where there's always going to be creatives and their role in the future is going to become more and more important. I agree that especially in a world where these tools are very powerful, the creatives and the people who are building and leveraging those tools are going to be playing a very important role in society. But overall, I think that this is a great place to actually wrap it up. Thank you so much for coming on to the podcast, man. This has been absolutely incredible. I always love talking to you, learning from you, and we're definitely going to have to get you back on the podcast at some point.
Yeah, I'd love it, man. Well, it'd be really fun to do the next one in person with a couple of drinks and just kicking back on the couch and just kind of see what we can come up with. I love what you're doing, man, with this podcast, what you've done with Saz Mining. For your audience out there, if you're curious what we're up to at Frontier, we're super easy to track down. Just frontiermining.com has all of our juicy information on it. You can get in touch with us via our website. You can reach out to me directly there as well. I'm not as heavily present on social media, and that's a whole nother conversation that we can save for a future podcast. But if you do want to track me down personally, probably at least for these professional interactions, best places to find me is either on LinkedIn, or you can also find me on Instagram, Kyle A. Heron on Instagram. And beyond that, well, we have an interesting road ahead of us, man. If we have these 2-year check-ins every once in a while, the conversation is going to look totally different each time, even with the same questions asked. I know that the answers that I provide to some of the questions you posed on our last conversation probably look different than today. Lord knows 2 years from now, man. I probably will just have GPT come on and have this little conversation on my behalf. I'll just say, respond to Will's questions like I would.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely crazy. I'm excited to see how it goes, and we'll stay in touch with everything that's happening.
100%, man. Well, best of luck with the podcast, man. If I can support it all, please let me know. I've got a ton of smart people that I'm sure would be happy to be on. So give me a holler if you need guests. And otherwise, man, have a great rest of your week, and we'll connect again soon.
And if you want to learn from Brad Mills' wild story going from rags to riches, click this video right here. You'll hear a true American dream story that ensures you won't ever get scammed again.
Inflation is transitory.